You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 641 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. That song you're hearing right now is, of course, Leave the Lights On from our good friends in Passafire. You can check those guys out anywhere you get your music. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And today, gonna continue talking about everything that the Rangers are doing this offseason here. Obviously, we covered the big signing, which was Vincent Trocheck. Talked about him in great detail. We're gonna do another couple of, Trocheck-centric episodes in the future, talking about, where he might line up as far as line combinations are concerned, if he could be an option to replace Ryan Strome on the second power play unit, or if there's a better option there and maybe put Trocheck on the second unit. We'll get to all that in due time. But in today's episode, we're gonna break down the trade of Patrik Nemeth to the Arizona Coyotes. This is something that we've talked about kind of in passing, but obviously, free agency, there's a lot going on, and, you kind of just have to hit the ground running every day. And like I said, Vincent Trocheck was kind of the headline. We're going to move on to some other things that the Rangers have done as well here today. In addition to Patrik Nemeth, we're going to talk about the player that the Rangers got back in the Nemeth trade. That would be 22-year-old defenseman Ty Emberson, a former third-round pick by the Coyotes. We will also talk about another New York Ranger free agent signing, and that would be 31-year-old center Ryan Carpenter, who in all likelihood will kind of take on the Kevin Rooney role that Rooney played in years past for this team. But once again, we begin with Patrik Nemeth, and in case you missed it, you just need a quick refresher here. Patrik Nemeth, once again traded to the Arizona Coyotes. The Coyotes get Patrik Nemeth. They also get a second-round pick in 2025 and a conditional second-round pick in 2026. And with the conditional pick, Arizona has the option to acquire the Rangers' own 2014 third-round pick or its own 2026 second-round pick. So, in all likelihood, probably going to be 2 second-round picks, although I suppose you never know which way the Coyotes might go there. And, of course, the Rangers, once again, acquire defenseman Ty Emberson as part of that trade. And as a quick aside, we'll get back to Nemeth in just a second, but while we're talking about draft picks here, want to give you guys just a quick rundown of, where things stand with the Rangers as far as, future draft classes are concerned. In 2023, next season, the Rangers will not have their own third-round pick, but they will have the Avalanche third-round pick. The Rangers also will not have a pick in the 4th round or the 5th round, and then in the 6th round, in addition to their own pick, they also have the Jets. And that goes along with, the normal Ranger picks. The Rangers will have their own 1st-round pick, their own 2nd-round pick, and their own 7th-round pick. So that's where things stand as far as next year's draft class is concerned. And the year after that, the Rangers have all of their own picks, except they do not have a pick in the 3rd round. So that's where things stand there. But back to Nemeth here. God, where do you even start? I mean, to begin with, I'm not going to do revisionist history on here. I'm not going to, go back in time and try to claim that, I was against this signing by Chris Drury. I always thought this was a terrible signing. There's no way they should have brought him in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When this signing was announced last year, I thought it was fine. I thought it was a good, solid signing, not a franchise-altering signing or the kind of move that's going to vault you to a Stanley Cup championship. Nothing like that. But to me, to use a baseball term, this wasn't a grand slam. This was just a solid base hit up the middle for Chris Drury. I like the idea of bringing a veteran defenseman because the Rangers are so young on the blue line. Trouba's the oldest, and I think he's still like 27 or 28, and everybody else, it seems like, is like 23 or younger. So, okay, bring in a steady veteran defenseman, somebody that has a very limited ceiling, but also a very safe floor. Somebody that's just going to go out there, give you fairly consistent hockey night in and night out, while in all likelihood playing on the bottom pairing. So as far as the concept of, limited ceiling, but safe floor, I was half right. Because yes, Patrik Nemeth, when he played for the Rangers last season, showed beyond any shadow of a doubt that he did indeed have a very limited ceiling. There were times last year where I thought Ranger Twitter was a little bit too tough on him, kind of went out of their way to just bash the guy, and there were times where I would stand up for him. But, toward the end of the season, I started to have to recognize facts here, and the facts are Patrik Nemeth at his absolute best, on the best brand of hockey, kind of a night that Patrik Nemeth is going to play. That was kind of a weird way to word it, but you get what I'm saying. Patrik Nemeth at his absolute best was painfully mediocre, and he was not at his absolute best all that often last season. Patrik Nemeth at his absolute worst, which I thought would be like, league-wide average defenseman, or at least an average defenseman as far as a third pairing defenseman is concerned. But no, Patrik Nemeth at his absolute worst was one of the worst defensemen in hockey last season. I don't even think that's really an exaggeration. And it was just a bizarre season because, he just never got his season off the ground, it felt like. There were times where he had some injuries. There were times where, he had an illness. There were times where he was held out of the lineup with what they were saying were personal reasons. And all of these things were kind of used interchangeably. And then, everybody thought that he was sick. And no, he's actually out for personal reasons. And everybody thought he was out for personal reasons. No, he's actually dealing with an injury. It just kind of went on and on and on like this to the point where you never really knew what was going on or what the deal was or why he wasn't in the lineup. For a while there, I feel like they were almost kind of inventing reasons why he wasn't in the lineup to allow Nemeth to kind of save face and not, have the designated healthy scratch distinction. Eventually, there was no choice. By the time they got down the stretch and certainly then into the playoffs, they had to healthy scratch Patrik Nemeth. They really didn't have any choice whatsoever, and there was no more hiding it. But yeah, for the longest time, everything that Patrik Nemeth did was just kind of shrouded in mystery. All these different reasons why he wasn't in the lineup. And then, of course, when he was out there, he just wasn't any good. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Again, I stood up for him for as long as I possibly could. By the time the playoffs rolled around, though, he's out there taking terrible penalties and just completely unable to keep up with the speed of play, leaving the front of the net unguarded. I mean, anything that could go wrong went wrong with Patrik Nemeth in the playoffs, and the Rangers eventually kind of smartened up and realized, okay, this guy can't play. He's not an option. Our third pairing has to be Braden Schneider and Justin Braun. And we're going to continue talking about all this in just a second. I'm eventually going to talk about the player that the Rangers got back in exchange for Nemeth and the 2 draft picks. Once again, that would be Ty Emberson, young defenseman from the Coyotes. I'm also going to debate whether this is the worst move of the Chris Drury tenure. I think there's a very good chance that it is. We'll kind of compare and contrast it to some other things that, people have called out Chris Drury for. But for my money, not to spoil anything here, but yeah, it's definitely up there as far as the worst moves that Drury has made. He's had more hits than misses since taking over, but this one was clearly a miss. But yeah, we are going to continue talking about all that in just a second. But first, just want to let everybody know, today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's Major League Baseball season. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, just wanted to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. So the million-dollar question as it pertains to the Patrik Nemeth situation, is this the worst move that Chris Drury has made since becoming general manager of the New York Rangers? I know that this could spark some debate. There's going to be a lot of fans who might look at the Pavel Buchnevich trade. Again, we've been over this a couple times on this podcast. Bottom line with that trade, it was a necessary evil. It's not something that, I celebrated when they did it, but it just felt like they weren't going to be able to give Pavel Buchnevich the kind of money that he was going to command long-term. He ends up with the St. Louis Blues, 4-year deal, worth $5.8 million per season. And I think now we're all starting to kind of realize why this move was made. I mean, yes, you could have signed Pavel Buchnevich, but look how tight the Rangers are against the salary cap right now. And look at how many guys still need to be paid. We're going to have Lafreniere, K'Andre Miller, and Philip Hedl all as restricted free agents next offseason. And if you're paying $5.8 million to Pavel Buchnevich, then you might have to say goodbye to, a really young, promising player. I mean, I don't think they would let Lafreniere go, but they might have to leave somebody like K'Andre Miller go. That would not be good. K'Andre Miller is a budding superstar in this league. So I think the Nemeth signing is worse than the Buchnevich trade. At least with the Buchnevich trade, wasn't necessarily ideal, but you could see where Drury was coming from. You get Sammy Blais, you get a second-round pick. It's fine. I don't have any issues with that, really. It's not a trade that I celebrated, but it's a trade that I understood. Some other people, this isn't really a move, but you might kind of look at how Drury and the Rangers have handled the Vitaly Kravtsov situation. There's plenty of blame to go around between Kravtsov and the Rangers themselves. Nobody handled it particularly well this past season, and Drury can be a little bit hard-headed when it comes to situations like that, I think. But again, that's not all going to fall on Chris Drury, and Vitaly Kravtsov, even before Drury became the general manager, was obviously having some issues with the Rangers. So to me, this signing of Patrik Nemeth is still the worst. I mean, you bring him in on a 3-year, $2.5 million deal, and he just can't play hockey. He just was not good enough for the Rangers last season. We've been over the reasons why, he was so ineffective for this team, and I think, one thing that I'll throw out there, and I mentioned this even when they signed Patrik Nemeth, they brought him in the 3-year, $2.5 million deal. He had a limited no-trade, clause in his contract where he could block trades to 8 different teams. I assume the Coyotes were not on that list. Either that or he just agreed to waive the no-move clause, but probably the former is more likely. But they bring him in on that contract. I think the thinking for the Rangers at that point was that Nemeth probably won't end up playing out all 3 years of this contract, and that, he'll just be there as kind of a stopgap option once the Rangers have a young defenseman that is really ready to go and take the bull by the horns. The Rangers would then trade Patrik Nemeth away and open up that spot for, a Nils Lundkvist or a Zach Jones or whoever it might be. And technically that is what happened here, but now you're looking at a situation where the Rangers had to bribe the Coyotes with basically 2 second-round draft picks in order for them to take on the last 2 years of this Patrik Nemeth contract. And when he was first signed last year, and as I mentioned, I figured that the Rangers would eventually end up trading him before that contract ran its course, but you were probably thinking at the time, okay, well, we signed Patrik Nemeth. If we have to trade him somewhere down the road, we can get a 3rd-round pick, maybe a 4th-round pick for Patrik Nemeth. No, you couldn't get anything for him. You had to bribe the acquiring team with 2 second-round draft picks in order for them just to take him off of your hands. It's very reminiscent of the Mark Stahl situation. Obviously, the Rangers were looking to rebuild, and they just didn't want Mark Stahl anymore. His play had really fallen off. He had 1 year left on his contract. Rangers wanted to dump that contract, essentially, and what they did was they traded Mark Stahl along with a 2nd-round pick to Detroit in exchange for basically nothing, and Detroit took in Mark Stahl and took the Rangers off the hook as far as the contract is concerned, and the Rangers were just like that. They washed their hands clean of Mark Stahl. The difference there is, Mark Stahl had been a really solid New York Ranger for about 10 or 12 or how many years it was before that, was on a team that went to the Stanley Cup, and he only had 1 year left on his contract. And again, I know his play had fallen off the last couple of years with the Rangers, but he was a solid defenseman before that. With Patrik Nemeth, he was only here for 1 year. He still had 2 years left on his contract, and I think that's why, whereas with Mark Stahl, the Rangers only had to trade away 1 second-round pick. With Patrik Nemeth, they had to give away 2 second-round picks because he's got 2 years left on his contract, and any team acquiring him, the Coyotes are basically stuck with this guy, and they don't care because they're taking the long road as it pertains to the rebuild. They're happy to just have him there, and if he plays half decently next season, I'm sure the Coyotes will look to flip him somewhere else for a mid to late round draft pick. But yeah, very reminiscent of the Mark Stahl situation, but this one was even worse for all the reasons that I just mentioned. And think about this. Patrik Nemeth plays 1 season with the Rangers. He basically ended up costing the Rangers 3 draft picks, because think about it. I just mentioned the 2 draft picks that they had to trade to the Arizona Coyotes to offload him, a 2nd-rounder and a conditional 2nd-rounder. They also, in the middle of this preceding season, had to trade a 3rd-round pick to the Philadelphia Flyers to acquire Justin Braun, basically to come in and do the job that Patrik Nemeth himself proved so incapable of doing. They had to bring in a steady veteran defenseman, somebody who doesn't really have a lot of flash or excitement to his game, but somebody who's just a steady pair of hands back there, isn't going to lose you too many games, will just play steady, consistent hockey, just does all the little things well. I think Justin Braun, for the most part, did that once he came over to the New York Rangers. And, he's on his way. The definition of a rental, he's back in Philly now. But they had to give up that 3rd-rounder to bring him in just to have Patrik Nemeth insurance. And, of course, initially, they went with Nemeth and Braun in the lineup rather than Braden Schneider. And then for a while, Braun was the odd man out. And eventually they got it right, and Patrik Nemeth was the odd man out. But they had to give up that 3rd-rounder. Now, maybe they bring in Justin Braun either way just to have some insurance. But to me, I look at this. We got 1 year of subpar hockey from Patrik Nemeth, and it costs us a 3rd-rounder to bring in Braun and 2 second-rounders just to unload Patrik Nemeth. That is quite the price for somebody that just played one subpar season of hockey with the New York Rangers. And I should also mention, look, even though I'm being critical here, I'm just trying to keep it real. Patrik Nemeth did not play well for the Rangers last year. None of this makes Patrik Nemeth a bad person or anything like that. We've talked before on the show about how there's a very tight-knit bunch on this New York Ranger team. I think he was part of that. I never got the sense that he was on an island and disliked by his teammates or anything. He seemed to be pretty well liked overall. It's just a case where it didn't work out. And so with all that said, I've got really nothing bad else to say about Patrik Nemeth. It's nothing against him the person, just him the hockey player. Obviously, it very clearly did not work out for the New York Rangers. And I would also just like to give a little bit of credit to Chris Drury here, because even though he kind of messed up here bringing Patrik Nemeth, again, what I would consider the worst move that he's made as Ranger GM, hey, you know what? At least he can admit a mistake and just unload the guy and do what he has to do. There's general managers in this league, I have no doubt. There's 31 other general managers in this league. At least a few of them would be stubborn and just try to run it back with Patrik Nemeth again this upcoming season and just kind of refuse to admit a mistake. Now, Drury didn't come out and say, oh, I made a mistake here, I screwed up. He would never do that. I mean, it'd be mean to Nemeth, and there'd be no real purpose in doing that. But his actions speak louder than words here. He knew he had to unload this guy. He did it. Nemeth's gone. And hey, you know what? All the best to Patrik Nemeth with the Arizona Coyotes. Hopefully he can play a little bit better for them than he played for the Rangers this past season. But yes, this is a move that absolutely 100% needed to happen. We will talk about the defenseman that the Rangers received in the Patrik Nemeth trade. That would be 22-year-old Ty Emberson. We will talk about him, and we will also talk about Ryan Carpenter, who the Rangers signed in free agency. We will do all that in just a second. All right, once again, shifting our attention to Ty Emberson, who the Rangers got in the Nemeth trade, as well as Ryan Carpenter, who the Rangers signed in unrestricted free agency. And we will start with Ty Emberson, obviously not really a household name, but a 22-year-old righty defenseman, 6'1", 195 pounds. Drafted by the Arizona Coyotes in the 3rd round of the 2018 NHL draft, going number 73 overall. Emberson is still on his entry-level contract. He is, in fact, in the final season of his ELC. He is making $853,000 this year. He is a restricted free agent after this upcoming season here, and he is yet to make his NHL debut. And to be honest, I think it's going to be kind of tough to see it happening this year. I mean, to begin with, as we've noted on here, the top 5 Ranger defenseman spots of the 6 spots are pretty much spoken for. You look at Fox, Lindgren, Trouba, Miller, Schneider. You tell me which one of those 5 players isn't going to be on the opening night roster next season. I think it's very doubtful that any of them will not be there. Barring a trade or something completely unforeseen here, those 5 guys are going to be penciled in to the lineup every single night. And as far as the 6th spot, I mean, never say never, I guess, but that means that Emberson is going to have to contend with the likes of Zach Jones, Nils Lundqvist, Matthew Robertson, Hunter Skinner. Obviously not going to be easy to beat out all of those players, especially when you consider that I think those are all players that the Rangers themselves drafted. I'm almost positive without checking. If you're still hearing this, that is the case, because I will check it before, putting this episode out there. But yeah, I mean, those are the Rangers guys. This is somebody that's just brought in via a trade. Never say never, because the Rangers, they have shown that, if you outperform your draft status or whatever it might be, they will give you a chance. You can earn an opportunity, but I just don't see how Emberson's going to leapfrog all those players that I just mentioned. But it's nice to have some organizational depth and somebody that I suppose still has at least a little bit of upside. I mean, he is just 22 years old, and like I said, he's played strictly in the AHL thus far in his career, has yet to make his NHL debut, and obviously the Coyotes thought highly enough of him to make him a 3rd-round draft pick. As far as what he did in the AHL last season, Emberson played in 58 games with the Tucson Roadrunners, scored 4 goals, had 7 assists, so 11 points. He was also a minus 25 in those 58 games. And for what it's worth, I found this kind of interesting. He was actually the captain of the University of Wisconsin during his last season there in 2020-2021, and he also played 5 games on the USA World Juniors team in 2019-2020. We've got another new Ranger as well. That would be 31-year-old center and right winger Ryan Carpenter. He's primarily a center. He gets a 1-year deal from the New York Rangers, and he will make the league minimum $750,000. He stands an even 6 feet tall and goes an even 200 pounds. And, I like this signing for what it is. Chris Drury had mentioned that he was hoping to still pick up a center in free agency who was kind of the Kevin Rooney ilk. And of course, Rooney himself now going to be playing with the Calgary Flames. He goes to Calgary on a 2-year deal worth $2.6 million. So an average annual value of $1.3 million. It's not obviously a ton of money, but as we've discussed on here, the Rangers, they probably couldn't afford it. They're in a situation where they've got to save money wherever they can. So they let Kevin Rooney walk, and they bring in someone here in Ryan Carpenter, who they are likely hoping can fill the Kevin Rooney role, play the fourth line, likely at center, kill some penalties, all the stuff that Kevin Rooney did, play a fairly physical brand of hockey. Carpenter, for anybody who might not know him, obviously, again, not really a household name here, but he's bounced around the league quite a bit, actually, since making his debut with the Sharks all the way back in 2015, 2016. He entered the league as an undrafted free agent, so one of those players that has obviously... you're undrafted. You got to scratch and claw and fight and kick and scream to stay in the NHL, get all your opportunities, and then ultimately remain in the NHL. And here is Carpenter, again, 31 years old, into his early 30s now, still hanging on to a spot in the NHL. And throughout his career, gone from the Sharks to the Knights to the Blackhawks to the Flames, and now to the New York Rangers. 308 career games in the NHL. He scored 26 goals, picked up 43 assists, so he's got only 69 points in 308 games. It's fine for a fourth liner. Not really that much else is expected. He's also a minus 27 for his career. He has averaged 12 minutes and 50 seconds of ice time for his career, 549 hits, and 145 block shots. He has a career face-off success rate of 48.2%. I should also mention that Carpenter has played in 26 career Stanley Cup playoff games, no goals and 6 assists in those games. And what's particularly of note here as it pertains to his playoff games is that he was on the Vegas Golden Knights team that went to the Stanley Cup final back in 2017-2018. So there's obviously some familiarity there with Gerard Gallant. He played for Gallant for 2 years with Vegas, and the second of those 2 seasons was Carpenter's best in the NHL, at least if you go by points. He had 5 goals and a career-high 13 assists for a career-high 18 points, and that was back in 2018-2019. If we zoom in on what he did last year, played in 67 games total between the Blackhawks and the Flames. He had 3 goals and 9 assists. He was also a minus 11, won 52% of his faceoffs. So a better year last year on the dot than we've seen him do for most of his career. And, it's interesting because all of a sudden the Rangers are looking a little bit better as far as winning faceoffs is concerned. You look at Mika Zibanejad, that's an area of his game where he's really improved. You look at Barclay Goodrow, if he's going to end up playing center for this Ranger team, which is certainly possible. He's pretty comfortably over 50% for his career. You get Carpenter's coming off of a season where he won 52%. Vincent Trocheck is very good on the dot. And then, of course, Hedl, that's a weakness of his game. But between the other 3, all of a sudden you've got some guys that you feel pretty good about can win you a big face-off in a big spot. As for Carpenter, he's also got a reputation of being a strong penalty killer. Saw a good amount of time on the kill for both the Blackhawks and the Flames last season. So, hopefully, once again, Drury mentioned that he's looking for, kind of a guy of the Kevin Rooney ilk, and I think he found his guy here. He's basically got a less expensive version of Kevin Rooney. We'll see if he can, obviously play up to the level that Kevin Rooney was at. Not that Rooney was a superstar or anything, but he is somebody that I think did a nice job rounding out the Ranger lineup, gave you some good minutes on the fourth line, excellent penalty killer. Hopefully Carpenter can come in here and do a lot of those things as well. It's a signing that I think is completely fine for what it is. And I would imagine he'll be out there on opening night this season. Obviously, there's going to be some competition. I think before they brought in Carpenter, maybe Gustav Riedel from the SHL, who the Rangers signed, he was looking like he might play that role, fourth line center. As things stand right now, though, I think Carpenter's probably got the inside track. I think we'll probably see him out there on opening night, and it's probably someone who will be in the lineup more often than he'll be a healthy scratch. So once again, we'll see how it all goes. I should also mention there were a couple of other minor signings by the New York Rangers. We will get to these players in a future episode. That would be Turner Elson as well as Andy Welenski. As I mentioned, we will discuss both those guys, maybe even in the next episode. I should also mention at the end of today's episode here, this bears repeating because in our last show, we talked quite a bit about Tyler Motte. He was still unsigned, and There's conjecture. Could he still come back to the New York Rangers? Would the Rangers make some kind of a move to open up some cap space and hang on to a player like Tyler Motte? Only time is going to tell there. I don't think it's really all that likely, even though Motte is kind of lingering out there on the free agent market. I would put it at maybe like 20 or 25% that Motte ends up back with the New York Rangers, but I don't think it's something that can be ruled out either. We'll see how it all shakes out. I'd love to see him back, but obviously you can't go nuts and give Tyler Motte a crazy expensive, crazy long contract, which they won't. They'll keep it within reason if they bring him back. But we'll see. It's at least possible. It's at least possible that Tyler Motte is kind of holding on to hope, like some of us are, that he can find his way back to the New York Rangers. Maybe the Rangers are in contact with him and, we're going to try to make room for you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. I mean, eventually, obviously, Motte is going to have to sign somewhere. He can't wait forever for the Rangers. And I don't even know how likely that is, but I wanted to at least float it out there as a possibility. It's at least in the realm of possibility that the Rangers and Tyler Motte are still maintaining contact, or it's possible that both sides have moved on and Motte's still kind of just picking and choosing where he wants to sign and just kind of slow playing it a little bit here. But I figure, we can pretty much call it there for today. Just a quick reminder that anybody that wants to send in their Artemi Panarin Game 7 story, you can definitely feel free to do so. I've heard from a lot of you guys already. We are going to get to that episode once all the dust kind of settles on free agency. And, obviously we still have to talk about the Ranger draft class. For the most part, we still have to cover most of the players from the draft class there, so we will do that. We'll get through all that stuff. We'll eventually work our way to sharing some stories that you guys have sent in to me. Basically, if you're listening to this, you're more than welcome to send in your Artemi Panarin Game 7 overtime story. Where were you? Who were you with? What was your reaction when he scored? Did you think the Rangers were going to win it? How nervous were you? Just let me know exactly how it all went down. I've already heard some pretty funny stories from some of you guys, and definitely looking forward to that episode where I can basically just read all your stories and share them on the show. But that will do it for today, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that is @LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers on YouTube. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you next time. Thanks for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. In our next episode, we're going to continue talking about the Rangers free agent pickups, the guys that I mentioned a little bit earlier. We'll also talk a little bit about developmental camp and whatever else that we can get into. Now make your second listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast.